Hello, and thank you for joining us as part of the 2021 Virtual Celtic Celebration. My name is Pam Packard, and I will be talking to you about the mysterious and wonderful figure known as the Green Man. But before I do, we do have some donors we would like to thank. The Arizona Commission on the Arts, the Flagstaff Arts Council, Flagstaff Community Foundation, Coconino County, and the City of Flagstaff. Thank you so much for helping to make this possible. And one more thing before we begin, a disclaimer. I am not a Green Man scholar. I am not a Green Man expert. I am what I call a Green Man fan. I do love the Green Man. I grew up down in Phoenix and was fortunate to have parents who took us kids camping every summer for 2 to 3 weeks at a time in the White Mountains here in eastern Arizona. And I fell in love with nature there and felt so at home. As a child, I also attended an Irish Catholic school. And while I know I have some Irish blood, I don't know a lot of my lineage, but I do have a great affinity for all things Celtic. And so you combine my love of nature and my affinity for all things Celtic, and you have a Green Man fan. So, today I'm going to share a little bit of history, but mostly I'm going to just have some fun with a little lore, share some art, some poetry. And I'm going to do a Green Man tree oracle reading. So thank you again for being here, and let's get started. And let me just say that none of the information is mine alone. I was trained several years back. Trained isn't the right word, but I did study some Celtic shamanism with a guide here in Flagstaff several years ago, and I received so much useful information from her. Plus, I have referred to several books and internet sites for most of this information, and I will try to credit those when I can. Okay, so first of all, I want to start with some art to give you an idea of what Green Man looks like. You probably already know, but this one is a copy of a watercolor painting simply called The Green Man, and the artist is Peter Williams, and I did get this off the internet. And you'll see that in this picture he has horns. He is often represented this way, especially when being identified with the Celtic god of vegetation and fertility, Cernunnos. Here's another fabulous picture of the Green Man. He seems a little bit younger in this picture. This came from a website called The Spirit of the Green Man. It's a UK site, and this artist is Kathleen Minton, and she incorporated other symbols of nature, little mouse and some mushrooms, plus a couple of moon phases there to show that Green Man is very much tied up with the turning of the seasons. And this picture is my favorite. It hangs in my bedroom, and it was so perfect for this frame. It actually came from a calendar. The art is by Brian Froud, F-R-O-U-D, and he does all sorts of wonderful mythical creatures. Love these little guys down here, Green Man's companions. I want to say that while I am going to be using the term Green Man, there have been images of green women, and there certainly are many goddesses in world traditions that are associated with vegetation and fertility, Gaia, of course, being well known. And this is just a fun little figure I have at home also that brings in the feminine force and the mother. So, love that. All right, and here we go. Here we have this lovely, wonderful, nearly living, breathing representation of a full-bodied Green Man. Normally it is just the head, and that is speculated to be because a group of ancient Celts had great reverence for the head and considered it to be the seat of the soul. So that's why it's speculated that often the figure is just a head, but there are full-figured representations. This one next to me, and this wonderful guy who came from a website called the matadornetwork.com. It's a pagan traveling website as far as I can tell. I don't know who put this structure together, and I don't know who photographed it, but apparently it was found in Oklahoma in a Renaissance festival in 2016. So he is marvelous, and I would love to encounter him in the woods. Okay, so that's it for pictures right now. No, well, for pictures, but one more little sculpture figurine that I have of the Green Man. So, on we go to a little history. Who is the Green Man, and from where did he come? The most simple answer is that he is the spirit of nature, the spirit of all green and growing things. For some, he serves as an ancient symbol of nature and fertility, and by being both human and plant, he represents humankind's connection to the earth. For some, he is a symbol of wildness and possibly reflects our own untamed nature back to us. In recent years, the image of the Green Man has been, not surprisingly, appropriated by those fighting against environmental degradation and climate change, as is seen in this internet image, created by one Richard Davis and found on Fine Art, what's it called? FineArtAmerica.com. So this here apparently it's just labeled Green Man for Pagan Global Warming Climate Change Activists. And again, the artist for that was Richard Davis. So, very alive and present in today's world. So, Green Man is a spirit, a symbol, a manifestation of nature, an archetype of our oneness with the earth, and he is referred in that way by this author, William Anderson, in his book Green Man, The Archetype of Our Oneness with the Earth. One thing we know about him is he's very, very old, though the term Green Man is not that old at all. In fact, this descriptive term wasn't coined until 1939, even though these faces have existed for hundreds of years prior to that time. And the idea of a spirit or god or goddess of nature and vegetation, often green in color, has existed in world traditions and mythologies for thousands of years from the east to the west. As I mentioned, I got a lot of my information from books, and these 3 books here specifically. This one, as you might guess, Anderson's book, is a deep dive into the subject, and I have not read it all. These 2 little books, both written by John Matthews, while they seem a bit frivolous, I have found, comparing them to the information I did get from Anderson's book, the information in here is accurate, although very, very brief, which is good sometimes. So, in order to bring us up to the year 1939, the year in which Green Man was finally named, I'm going to read a little bit from this book, The Green Man Tree Oracle, Ancient Wisdom from the Spirit of Nature, by John Matthews and Will Worthington. Probably the oldest form of the Green Man was an actual tree, perceived as manlike in its form, branches for his arms, roots as his legs, and the trunk serving as his body. The rustling of leaves and the creaking of branches may well have been misheard to be speech, and the sheer power and longevity of certain trees would have made them seem godlike to the primitive human mind, and even to the modern mind, I might add. At some point in time, the first images of leafy faces appeared. These shared something of our human characteristics, but were nonetheless distinctly other. We might imagine one of our distant ancestors staring at the crinkled bark of a tree and seeing a face within it. And from this simple act, there came the idea of a green man, a spirit who was a living incarnation of all trees, who represented the cycle of growth in nature upon which every living person depended. In an age when everything was made of wood or stone, people learned to respect the things that sheltered them, the roof beams above them, the tables they ate off, and the chairs they sat on, and the wooden framed barn that stored their grain. All these were made from trees. Add to this the crops that fed them, for bread, beer, roof, and table, all derived from the beneficent spirit of growth personified by the green man. The oldest surviving images of this being, however, are found not in the green forests of Europe, but in the lands of the Middle East. There, in ancient cities like Hatra, which is present-day Iraq, we find time-worn carvings depicting faces that are half human, half tree, sometimes inclining more one way, sometimes another, but always sharing something of each species. The presence of the green man here most likely derives from the ancient vegetation gods who represented the energy of life itself and who were once worshipped in these lands. Then there's a long leap in time before the images that we would today consider green men, also called foliate heads, began to appear throughout Europe. The very fact that these faces appear in such proliferation suggests that they were known about long before this and were already familiar beings buried deep within the human consciousness. A particular set of circumstances accounted for their appearance at this time, and to some extent also dictated the form that they took. Carvings of green men appeared at a time when Europe was being increasingly Christianized, and despite the fact that most of the Western world had been nominally so for some time, alongside the formalized structure of the church, there also existed an entire world of folklore that enshrined the beliefs of an older pagan world. The word pagan simply means country dweller, and the beliefs that still held good throughout much of Europe were pagan at heart, even if they may have seemed otherwise on the surface. Partly for this reason, an aggressive program of ecclesiastical building was undertaken during the period in question and throughout much of the 12th and 13th centuries as well. All across Europe, vast cathedrals sprang up, their spires climbing towards heaven, supported on vast arches and pillars that resembled nothing so much as forests of stone. Many were carved to resemble trees, with vines and leaves decorating the crowns of the pillars and winding through their feet in intricate patterns. These cathedrals also had carvings of biblical scenes outlining the Christian version of creation from the fall to the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. Other figures found their way into the cathedrals, however, faces that would have not seemed out of place in a pagan shrine. Almost always carved in the highest reaches of the building, sometimes so far up that they remained hidden until comparatively recent times, when modern electric light finally revealed them. A family of strange faces looked down from on high at the congregations worshiping below. These faces were almost all made of leaves. Some had leaves growing out of their mouths, the corner of their eyes, their ears, or nostrils, while others seemed to be wholly leafy, with just a flash of the eye to give a nod towards humanity. Throughout Europe, there is barely a single medieval church or cathedral that does not contain at least one of these faces, and many have dozens of them. And it is one of these faces, shown by the vicar at St. Jerome's Church in Monmouthshire, Wales, to a young woman by the name of Lady Raglan, that inspired her to write an article called "The Green Men in Church Architecture," thus giving the figure its name, Green Man. Before this time, they had mostly been referred to as foliate heads, foliate meaning decorated with leaves or having a leaf-like motif. And I want to show another picture. This is a picture of the green man that Lady Raglan saw in the church in Wales that sparked her interest and intrigue in Green Man. And I'll just show a few other examples of images found in churches across Europe. Some were carved in wood, some were a bit more ornate, such as that figure there. These weren't found in just a few churches. They were very prolific in medieval churches across Europe. There's another wonderful one there, carved from stone. So again, why? Why all these foliate heads in these churches? One theory is that the medieval craftsmen building these churches sought to bring something of their own ancient traditions into the newborn Christian religion. Lady Raglan, according to Anderson in his book, actually felt that these were actual portraits based on a real man, the same character that was behind certain legends such as Robin Hood and Jack in the Green, and the King of May, who was a central figure in May Day celebrations across Northern and Central Europe. Of course, other scholarship has proved that this is limited in scope as it pertains to just a specific region. And as I noted earlier, the idea of Green Man was much more widespread than that. But these legends are fun and do describe the essence of nature in its ever-continuing cycle. One legend can be found in King Arthur's court, and I'm going to read from Anderson's book again. So, it is the New Year's banquet at the court of King Arthur. Arthur and Guinevere are seated with their knights. The banquet is about to begin when a huge man rides into the hall. His skin is green, his hair and beard reaching down to his elbows are green, his clothes are green, embroidered with birds and butterflies, and even his horse is green. He bears in one hand a holly bush with green jewels. He bears in one hand a holly bush and in the other an axe of green steel hung with green tassels. He glitters with green jewels, and in and out of his accoutrements and those of his horse run shining streaks and filaments of gold. He is the Green Knight. The Green Knight rides up to the king and issues his challenge. It is that any knight at Camelot may strike his head from his shoulders, provided that in 1 year's time he searches out the Green Knight to submit himself to the same trial. There is an appalled silence. Then Arthur, to save the honor of his court, takes up the challenge. But his nephew, Gawain, I'm not sure that I'm pronouncing that correctly, begs to be allowed to act in his stead. The Green Knight accepts Gawain as his challenger. He kneels for the blow, pulling his hair away from his neck. Gawain decapitates him with one stroke. The head rolls away and blood gushes out. The body of the Green Knight rises, picks up his head, mounts his horse, and holds his head towards Gawain. The head with open eyes bids Gawain find him again at the Green Chapel in 12 months' time. Come, the head says, or be known as a coward. Sparks fly from the horse's hoofs as he gallops from the hall. So here we have a great metaphorical story about the regeneration and rebirth that occurs every spring. And Green Man does have a very strong connection with the spring, and there are festivals and stories in which he figures prominently, along with the Spring Maiden, in all sorts of merrymaking ways. But his presence is felt year-round, as is demonstrated by a more recent fable called The Legend of the Oak King and the Holly King, which I will read in a bit. But first I want to read a poem written by author Anderson before he wrote this book. It is a beautiful portrayal of the Green Man's spirit as it lives in many trees throughout the turning of the year. And it has 13 stanzas. And I'll just read the little preface that the author gave. He said he had been doing Green Man research for some time, and he was fascinated by the way he had come and gone throughout history. And he says, I come to a break in my work as I realize that a batch of poems is waiting to be written. There is one poem that is announcing itself as a rhythm of faceted vowels twisting and jetting through convoluted pipes and culverts of consonants. The rhythm haunts me over a fortnight or so, and then it begins to attract images and memories of different kinds of trees. I come to realize that the rhythm is coming from the Green Man, and that he is speaking through the trees at different times of the year. After the appearance of this poem, I realized that I have to write a book, this book, about the Green Man. And so here is the poem entitled The Green Man. Like antlers, like veins of the brain, the birches mark patterns of mind on the red winter sky. I am thought of all plants, says the green man. I am thought of all plants, says he. The hungry birds harry the last berries of rowan, but white is her bark in the darkness of rain. I rise with the sap, says the green man. I rise with the sap, says he. The ashes are clashing their boughs like sword dancers. Their black buds are tracing wild faces in the clouds. I come with the wind, says the green man. I come with the wind, says he. The alders are rattling as though ready for battle, guarding the grove where she waits for her lover. I burn with desire, says the green man. I burn with desire, says he. In and out of the yellowing wands of the willow, the pollen-bright bees are plundering the catkins. I am honey of love, says the green man. I am honey of love, says he. The hedges of quick are thick with May blossom as the dancers advance on the leaf-covered king. It's off with my head, says the green man. It's off with my head, says he. Green man becomes grown man in flames of the oak, as its crown forms his mask and his leafage his features. I speak through the oak, says the green man. I speak through the oak, says he. The holly is flowering as hayfields are rolling. They're gleaming long grasses like waves of the sea. I shine with the sun, says the green man. I shine with the sun, says he. The hazels are rocking the cups of their nuts as the harvesters shout when the last sheaf is cut. I swim with the salmon, says the green man. I swim with the salmon, says he. The globes of the grapes are robing with bloom, like the hazes of autumn, like the Milky Way stardust. I am crushed for your drink, says the green man. I am crushed for your drink, says he. The aspen drops silver of leaves on earth's salver, and the poplars shed gold on the young ivy flower heads. I have paid for your pleasure, says the green man. I have paid for your pleasure, says he. The reed beds are flanking in silence the islands where meditates wisdom as she waits and waits. I have kept her secret, says the green man. I have kept her secret, says he. The bark of the elder makes whistles for children to call to the deer as they rove over the snow. I am born in the dark, says the green man. I am born in the dark, says he. I think that is so lovely. So, I mentioned that I'm going to tell the legend of the Oak King and the Holly King. It is a very contemporary version. Before I do, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Wheel of the Year. I don't expect anybody to be able to read this, but up here at the top, on the 21st of December, known as winter solstice, we have the season of Yule, and then we move across, and over here, in spring equinox, and then we come on down, and we have summer down at the bottom, and fall over here. And I thought Anderson did such a wonderful job of portraying the movement around this wheel. And the reason I'm bringing this up now is because in the story about the Oak King and the Holly King, there's a battle. I don't want to give too much of it away before I read it, but the Holly King is in charge half of the year and the Oak King is in charge the other half of the year. And I'm going to leave it at that and just read this tale. This was written by a woman by the name of Erica Barron. It was featured on a website on December 3rd of 2016. The website is patheos.com. Apparently this is a blog called Nature's Sacred Journey. And this is going to tie us back in to the more recent depiction of the Green Man as an icon for the environmental movement. And then we'll wrap it up with an oracle reading. So, this is called the Yule story. The story is told that in the beginning there were two gods who were brothers. And like many brothers, they struggled with each other for ascendance and power. One brother was the king of the forces of life, light, and warmth. He wore a crown made of green oak branches and brought with him all growth and vitality, fertility, and abundance. He was called the Oak King. His brother was the king of the forces of death, cold, and darkness. He wore a crown made of the prickly holly branches and brought with him all withering and decay, stillness and hibernation. He was called the Holly King. The brothers were identical in strength, and so year after year, the pattern was repeated. Each year, the Oak King would grow strong and mighty, and during his time of dominance, the light would gradually increase, bringing with it warmth and abundance. But each year, at the height of his power, he would be thrown down by the Holly King. In the wake of the Holly King's victory, the light would gradually wane, and as it did, cold would come and the land would go dormant. But at the height of the Holly King's power, he would be challenged again by the Oak King, and he would fall, and the cycle would repeat again and again. Alone, the brothers were equals, but soon there came a race of beings known as people. The people watched this cycle, and pretty soon they began to take sides. The people loved light and warmth, and they feared the darkness and cold. And so each year, they would celebrate the victory of the Oak King, but they would mourn the victory of the Holly King. When the two struggled with each other, the people would lend the strength of their voices and their bodies, their minds and their spirits to the Oak King, but the Holly King was without their support. And so time went by. Over time, the people's adoration of warmth and light only grew, and so they began to invent ever new ways to find light in the darkness and warmth in the cold. And finally, if they wished it, they could spend all of their time in the light they had created, and they could be warm all year long. But their efforts to stay always in the light and the warmth were not without consequences. Generations passed and generations again, and the people did not at first notice the shifts in the balance. But finally, they could ignore it no longer. The people began to notice that darkness was disappearing from the land, driven out by millions of lights the people had created. Animals, birds, plants, even people began to suffer the effects of light unbalanced by darkness. But it was not just darkness that was disappearing. The cold began to flee too. The whole world began to get warmer. Summer began sooner and lasted longer. Ice that had been frozen far longer than the longest memory of the oldest person in the land began to melt. Migrating birds and animals began to be confused about when to begin the migration. Plants found themselves rooted in climates that no longer supplied their needs. The air was changing, and the winds that had brought rain and taken it away again began to flow in unexpected directions, causing drought here and flood there. The people began to see that their support of warmth and light over cold and darkness had altered the balance of the world. They began, slowly, one at a time, to realize that the Holly King was dying. And for the first time, this thought filled them with fear. What would happen if the balance continued to be destroyed? Could they even survive in a world without the Holly King? And in the world of the gods, the Oak King realized it too. And though they had been competitors all these many centuries, he also realized that he loved his brother deeply and could not live without him. The longest night came, and the Oak King and the Holly King met again. But this time, the Oak King had no heart for the fight. He laid down his sword and spear. He came open-handed to his brother, who was struggling just to stay on his feet. The Oak King wrapped the Holly King in a tight embrace, and he promised to set aside their enmity and to help his brother heal. On the night when he usually claimed ascendance, the Oak King realized that the world was already too warm and too light, And so he laid the great oak crown on the head of his brother, took his hand, and each supporting the other, they went out into the world to see what could be done to restore balance. And that brings me to the end of the more formal presentation. And hopefully everybody in attendance out there agrees that it is so important for us to find this balance once again and to do what we can to save our precious planet. And I am going to have a little fun with my Green Man Tree Oracle cards. Let's see. I'm just going to pull one, and I'm going to ask for guidance for all of us when it comes to how we can best approach being in balance with our planet and with one another and doing the right thing. This is such a fun little set. These 3 items, the book, the cards, and this little green man figure, came together. It was one of those serendipitous things years ago when I was walking out of Barnes & Noble, which I rarely ever support, but it was in their clearance section. And I just had to have it. Okay, so the question, again, how can we best be in balance with nature and with one another? So I will shuffle these, and we will see what the green man tells us. These have different trees represented on each card. The book explains a little bit of the lore and the special message that accompanies it. So I'm just going to grab one out of the middle, and we will see what we come up with. Okay. The birch tree. Probably a very difficult image to see. White bark, of course, often mistaken for aspens. So his face is in there. Each tree does have a face somewhere in it. It's beautiful artwork. Anyhow, let's see how the birch can aid us. I need to find which page birch is on. Oh, very first listing. Okay, so the green man wisdom that comes from the birch tree. Something to ponder here. A good beginning leads to a good conclusion. So I'm going to repeat that. I want you all to take this with you. A good beginning leads to a good conclusion. So how can we use that in striking an appropriate balance with nature and among ourselves? I'm going to read what the divinatory meaning is here. Beginnings are always important, as are the ways we approach any new task. Good preparation and a willingness to lay the ground on which we will build are every bit as valuable as the eventual outcome. The green man's wisdom here is specific. Make a good start, and whatever you are undertaking will end well. This means paying attention to the moment of inspiration, which the Celts called AWEN, Awen, and following this to a satisfactory conclusion. Traditionally, birch was used to drive out evil spirits and return to sanity those who had become mad. Its calendrical association is with the beginning of the year and with the sacred festival of Samhain, which is November 1st, known as Halloween to most people. Hence its connection with making a fresh start, because that is considered the witch's new year. The birch is also one of the first trees to flower in the spring. The presence of this card in a reading indicates the need to rethink and to make the beginning of any new enterprise a clean and fresh one. So, I'm going to end my presentation there. Hopefully those words speak to you. Hopefully you have had fun learning a little bit about the Green Man, being in his presence. So again, thank you so very much for being here, and I hope you enjoyed it.